Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Friday, and that means the beginning of the weekend when a lot of booktubers take the opportunity to stop and make a video, talk to you a little about what their reading is like, how their reading week has gone, what they're working on, what they plan on reading next, what's on their docket, especially for the upcoming new month. I like to do that too. I've been having fun doing Friday reads these last few weeks. So I thought I'd do that again with books that I have recently read or reread, and some that I am going to read. And we'll start with this by Gertrude Himmelfarb. I read this when it first came out. I think I wrote about it when it first came out. It's The Roads to Modernity. I think this is about 500 pages long, her history of uh, the Enlightenment. Uh, for what I think are a collection of rather obvious reasons, I went back and read this again, and for what I think is fairly obvious reason, I found it incredibly bittersweet. It's really well done, but I don't think I'll be reading any more books about the Enlightenment anytime soon. But I recommended this when it first came out. I like it. My one problem with it the second time around was my same problem with it the first time around, which is that it can be a little dry. Uh, and sometimes I get the impression that some of the dryness is a rearguard action against insufficient research. I could be wrong about that. Certainly, there are parts of this book that read a lot more sure-footed than others. Uh, then this next one is a rarity. This is a book from 2025 that I read ahead of time, and I will read it again. I'm not done with it by any means. It's by Barry Bliss, who's a New Yorker cartoonist, and he did a graphic memoir. And this is not trailblazing at all, of course. There was a graphic memoir just a couple of years ago by a New Yorker artist that I thought was incredible, just amazing. And that one followed a couple of years before uh, a graphic memoir by New Yorker artist Roz Chast that is incredible. So, Roz Chast's book was about losing her parents to first old age and then death. In was about losing a mother to cancer. This book, those are powerful emotional subjects. This one is about subjects like that, but at the heart of it is something that's naturally going to hit me a lot harder, and that is losing a dog. It's You Can Never Die by Barry Bliss. I don't remember when this comes out, but I'll be reading it again. I don't know that I'll be writing about it, but I really liked it. Then we have a new Everyman's volume. I think this also comes out in the new year. Uh, this is The End of the World and Hard-Boiled Wonderland by Murakami, and it's an Everyman edition, and it's a new translation by Jay Rubin. And I don't like this. I don't particularly like this author. I go back and forth because every once in a while I think surely 80 Million Dude Bros can't be wrong. Every once in a while I see something in this author's work that I don't dislike. And now I wonder, this is the trap, of course, with modern authors who are more or less canonical. Murakami is more or less canonical. Until a scandal breaks and the more or less canonical machinery feels like it needs to drop him. I don't know that a scandal will break, but as long as he retains that more or less canonical status, I'm almost certainly going to be obliged, I'm not obligated by anybody else, but I set a bailiwick for my own reading. I think we all do. The remit for my reading is new releases in the American book market in the 15 or 16 genres that interest me. And that definitely includes both literature and translation and repackaging of classics and quasi-canonical classics. And that puts me in a position where something like this, I'm going to have to read. I'm going to have to reread. If a new translation comes out of Murakami, or you can name the others, any of the other quasi-canonical people involved who don't write in English, no matter who they are, I'm going to have to read new translations of them at least that long. I don't know that a new translation of this work is going to be able to change all the things that I dislike about it, but the question has to stay open because I can't read the original in Murakami's case. I'm totally dependent on translators. I've only read one translation of this work, so we shall see. I don't know that any of that made any sense. Then we have Peter Lovesey. This is Against the Grain. This is the last Peter Diamond novel, a little bit overshadowed by the fact that that Maggie Hope and Maisie Dobbs are both ending in 2024. But this is a long-running series that is also ending. The impression that I get from this, I like this series very much. I don't love it in the way that I think I'm supposed to, in the way that a lot of its fans do, but I like it. And the impression I get from the summary of this last book is that it goes out, unlike the other two series, on an anti-comic note, which would be interesting. It's always interesting to me when things like this don't end awkwardly by the death of the author, but rather are brought to an ending, where the author or the author's estate is saying there aren't going to be any more books. I always find that fascinating, and I always want to know what way it's done. And then there are the ongoing series where that isn't said, where that isn't done, where the author's estate decides, no, the creator of Hercule Poirot might be dead, but we're going to keep writing Hercule Poirot mysteries. And they don't view it as a sacrilege. They don't view it as any kind of disrespect for the author, the actual author. They just don't view it that way. Instead, they should view it that way, I think, because there can't be any argument that the only overwhelming motivation here is money. Or on a dead body. That necrofiction always bothers me along those lines. And one of the primary examples of necrofiction, I would say probably the most financially successful example of necrofiction, is Tom Clancy, who still has books coming out with his name big as life on the cover, even though he's been dead and roasting in hell for a long time. And he has a new book. And the reason I keep reading them is because a lot of them are very good. A lot of them are very entertaining, slightly bloated, Clancy-esque. For Pete's sakes, it's an adjective now. Thrillers, and I'm especially fond of the Jack Ryan novels. Jack Ryan being, of course, his breakout character from The Hunt for Red October, who in the course of I don't know how many books becomes president of the United States and still manages to have adventures. And that's this one. That's this latest one, which was written by Andrews and Wilson. I have no idea who they are, but this is Defense Protocol, a Jack Ryan novel. Tom Clancy's name, bigger than the title, bigger than anything on the cover, even though he didn't have anything to do with this. And this is these Clancy necrofiction novels tear something from today's headlines for President Jack Ryan to deal with. This is Taiwan and China, the tensions between Taiwan and China, a new Chinese premier that decides, rather than try to undercut Taiwanese independence or Taiwanese economy or the Western perception of this conflict, we'll just conquer them militarily. And what Jack Ryan as president would do. This book is, I think, over 500 pages long, which means that Jack Ryan as president, when confronted with the new Chinese premier's plan to conquer and subjugate, to execute and subjugate the population of Taiwan, does not simply call up the Chinese premier and say, go right ahead, but I want 15%. I'm assuming that President Jack Ryan doesn't do that, or this would be a pretty short novel. So presumably, this being wildly fictitious, he probably does something else. We'll see. I don't know Andrews and Wilson, but I have a pretty good track record with Clancy necrofiction. The reading of it, the page-by-page reading of it, I don't have any idea what to think about the broader phenomenon of necrofiction. I don't think I like it, but I don't think I like that broader phenomenon. But a book is a book, and whether it's Mark Cameron or Mark Greaney or whoever, I tend to like them. I tend to find them very enjoyable. So this next one is it's another effort in my ongoing quest to like cozy murder mysteries. I try this every week, at least one book every week. Cozy murder mysteries, for those of you who maybe read only World War II history, is a murder mystery in which the dead person is someone that nobody's going to miss. Usually it's the town curmudgeon or the town a-hole or whatnot. And it usually is heavy on the snarky, cozy personalities and the quirky locals. Usually there's a fish out of water element. In this particular book, there's a fish out of water element. They all gather together to solve the mystery of who killed this person that nobody really cares is dead. And there are lots of recipes, and there's lots of cocoa by the fire. There are almost always a plague of cats. And that's this. This is Digging Up Murder by Penny Brooke, in which takes place in Massachusetts. I think that's the thing that drew me to it, and it involves all the stereotypes you could imagine. The person who's found dead is not anyone who's going to cause hot, uncontrollable grief. No ugly side of murder. And the fish out of water protagonist goes home to her idyllic small town in order to help her grandmother at the bookstore, at the library, etc., etc. They gather together a bunch of quirky friends to solve the crime. I'd like to know. Sometimes I want to know. Sometimes I'm interested in the origins of the cozy murder mystery, just as an industry. Lord knows I have to find something to be interested in, since I'm not usually interested in books. I don't know that I'll be interested in this either. A cat will not help you to solve a murder mystery. A cat is waiting to eat your tongue. But and also someone has died, and also you solving a murder mystery. Would you want your own murder solved that way by a bunch of cafe slurping knitters and amateurs, people who are more interested in talking about the latest scone recipe than blood residue? Would you want your own murder mystery solved that way, or would you want it in the hands of professionals? I I don't know. I'll give it a try. I'm more interested in the etiology of the genre than I am in the genre itself. I have a strong suspicion that I know where the modern iteration of the cozy murder mystery comes from, and I don't think it comes from a book. I think it comes from Murder, She Wrote, the TV series. I could be wrong about that, but the TV series seems to me to be a little too sloppy to be imitating cozy murder mysteries, and I was reading and deeply involved in all things American book publishing when Murder, She Wrote premiered. And I don't remember thinking, oh, this is aping so-and-so. Maybe I was just missing the cozy murder mysteries of the time. We shall see. I don't hold out much hope for Digging Up Murder, but I'll give it a try. Then we have a reread, a slim little thing that I have courtesy of one of you. This is Empire Star by Samuel Delany. Also a cat on the cover. This is a kind of science fiction-y cat. I used to have this mass market paperback. A slim thing about a heroic young man engaged in a whole bunch of adventures. It doesn't read like Delany, from what I remember. I'll be giving it a reread this weekend for the first time. I don't even know. Since the early 70s. I think the early 70s is when I read this the first time. It'll be my first reread in a long time. What I remember and what I retrospectively think about it, having read everything else by Delany in the meantime, is it doesn't read a whole lot like him. But probably there will be undercurrents. If it's dumb, junky, gimmicky, Lucky Star type science fiction adventure, it will still be shot through with deeper currents of brilliance and complexity than anything else like that, just by virtue of the author, who could slum it, sure, with the best of them, but not ever completely. We shall see. Then we have a romance novel. This is by Mary Jo Putney, who's a romance novelist that I know and really like. This is Silk and Secrets. I don't know anything about it. The cover says that it's book 2, but with Mary Jo Putney, more than with most romance writers, these ladies are thoroughgoing professionals. They know their job really well, and they don't make dumb mistakes, like so many authors do, who then simultaneously look down on the genre of romance while making one dumb mistake after another. These ladies tend not to make dumb mistakes. And dumb mistake number 1 for a series of books is to make book 2 or book 3 or book 4 incomprehensible to anyone who hasn't read book 1. They understand that and tend to take care of it handily, so that if you all watch Sarah's channel at The Bookish Knitter, she's made a notorious name for herself for reading romance series out of order, and doesn't often complain that it's done poorly. One of the reasons why you can do that is because these authors are so professional. I don't think I've ever read book 1 in this series. The description of this one, of book 2, made it seem very adventure-y. Lots of different locales, lots of drawn daggers and creeping around tents and whatnot, which isn't what I'm used to from Mary Jo Putney. So we'll see. First of all, that plot description could be wrong, but I'll go wherever this author takes me. She almost never leads me astray. Then, I would once upon a time have said that about this next author as well, that he almost never leads me astray, but I don't know what's become of S.P. Somtow, the science fiction fantasy author S.P. Somtow, who some of you will know by, he's written books under a couple of different versions of his name. S.P. Somtow is the name under which he wrote his enormous werewolf novel that has a lot of good stuff in it. It's too long, but it comes closer to being a great werewolf novel than almost anything before Troy Tradup wrote The Lost Boy. And I've liked a lot of other stuff that he's done. His straight up science fiction for the Timescape label was great. I don't know what his story is now. I'd love to talk to him about it and find out why he isn't the headlining author for Tor or St. Martin's. Why he isn't that. Instead, he's doing these well-designed, eye-catchingly designed, odd self-published books. And I don't know if, I'm not saying, has he fallen on hard times, because I'm a foremost advocate of self-publishing. I think that any author should do it. I don't think that mainstream publishing houses bring anything to the equation anymore. I think mainstream authors would be foolish to go that route. The standard route for publishing for 80 years, 100 years, 180 years was pretty much the same. You work real hard on a manuscript. You then work real hard to get an agent, and the agent sells it to a publishing house. The agent is taking a chunk of what you earn. The publishing house is taking a gigantic chunk of what you earn. But the publishing house will then employ experts to proofread the book, edit the book, collate the book, design a cover for the book, market the book, push the book, get you all the media appearances that you need, etc., etc., etc. Push review copies to reviewers. Make sure that you're in bookstores. The mainstream publisher, once you go through all those hoops and you're paying 85% of the total gross that the book earns, is going to someone else, not you. Once you do all that, well, then you've got it made. And the way you will get that 15% to be enough to make you a living, or maybe buy you a mansion, is if your book is a runaway hit. But that it has no chance of becoming a runaway hit unless you have all these other people involved. I firmly believe that this old model is changing. And the new model is, you work real hard on a book. That still stays true, except for AI. You work real hard on a book. But at the same time that you're working real hard on a book, you are working on building your own audience. You are availing yourself of one or many social media platforms that did not exist when that old model was coming together. You build your own audience, and then you self-publish your book to that audience while growing that audience, and bypass the traditional book publishing industry completely. So your book will never appear in a traditional bookstore. You know what else never appears in traditional bookstores? Customers. So I'm not sure that you're missing much there. So I'm not denigrating self-publishing at all. I just don't understand, if you already have a name, if you already have a reputation as a great author, then I don't understand. Something must be explaining why S.P. Somtow is producing the books that he's producing. I have so far been enjoying them. And this is book 1 of historical fiction that he's doing, Roman historical fiction, set in the court of the Emperor Nero. This is Delicatus. Well-designed AI cover. I think this is the first book in a series. I think all the books in this series are out already, and I think they all have well-designed AI covers. I think there's a sister series. I need to read up on it. I haven't read this yet. The bits and pieces that I've read of S.B. Somtow now, the post mainstream publication S.B. Somtow, are really good. This is a really good author. I just, I don't know. I don't know. Does he own the rights to his earlier work? I bet he doesn't. Anyway, it's a big question for me. To my mind, if you are a successful mainstream author already, and S.B. Somtow was a science fiction author, a fantasy author, wasn't all that successful. He was really good. He's really good, but I imagine he wasn't all that successful financially. But if you are, like, what's an example? Well, we mentioned Tom Clancy necrofiction. One of the best authors, the best author of that necrofiction is Mark Greaney, the author of the Gray Man series. He has an ongoing series of books about an adventurer called The Gray Man. It's really popular. Mark Greaney is a really popular author. If you buy a new book of his, you know you are going to enjoy it. That's not nothing. That's a lot. That's true of S.B. Somtow as well. I'm not meaning to get away from him. We'll come back to this book. But to my mind, if you are a mainstream author like Mark Greaney, you would be crazy to stay with mainstream publishing. You'd just be crazy to do it. Mainstream bookstores are going to stock your book anyway, whether your publicist talks to them on the phone or not. They're going to stock your book anyway. You're already a known quantity. And instead of making the money that you make with the Gray Man series, you could make Brandon Sanderson amounts of money from your fans directly. And unlike Brandon Sanderson, I assume Mark Greaney would not be giving 70% to the Mormons. He would be giving all of it to his grandchildren. Anyway, that's a subject for another video. It's a subject for another time. I don't understand why name recognition authors don't all jump ship. Is I guess what I'm saying, because retail bookstores are going to include them anyway. So, but the financial take for the same amount of work, reaching the same readers, is astronomically greater. Just astronomically greater. I don't know what the reason is. A part of me thought when Brandon Sanderson did when it went independent, told all of his fans, I'm writing books, you can get in on the ground floor, and made what was the number? $90 million, something like that. An absurd amount of money. Just a reality warping amount of money. I assumed that when he did that, every professional author with any kind of name recognition would jump ship and start doing the same thing. And as far as I know, none of them have. So, but anyway, this is Roman historical fiction. In this case, I would assume from the title that this is. There are all sorts of disturbing stories out of Suetonius about Nero, and one of the most disturbing is a slave of his that he had modified, transgendered. It's a tricky subject. I trust this author to do it justice. We'll see. I'll report back as to whether or not it's any good. I have a feeling that I'm going to read this and immediately want to go on to the next book, that I'm going to love it, because this author's never written anything I didn't love. But we will see. Okay, well, as long as we're in ancient Rome and dealing with hanky-panky in ancient Rome, we might as well stick with this book, which I don't know. I don't know what I read. This is Evan Berg. This is by Evan Berg, and it's called Pompeii, City of Gay Sex. It's about a teenage boy who runs away from home, and almost immediately, is destitute and poor and cold and is found by another boy. And they both start going at it like bunnies in a pet store display window when the kids shouldn't be watching. And they've got the boy who takes our hero in has wonderful, sunny, open-minded parents, and there's all sorts of other people involved, all sorts of quasi-romantic relationships. There's all sorts of physical discovery going on, all against the backdrop of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. I don't know what I read here. I think this was suggested to me by Kindle Unlimited or one of those daily ebook sites, and it's not poorly done. There are anachronisms. There's not a whole lot of beat you over the head Roman research here. At first, I thought, well, why on earth would you do this? I mean, that is inherently kind of silly. Uh, uh, but then again, if you'd have told me ahead of time, I'd have said having a romance plot on the Titanic would also be inherently silly, and it ended up being quite touching. One of the most affecting lesbian love stories in cinematic history. uh, uh, Here, though, at first, my first thought before I started reading this, when I wanted to know just why, there was a lot of gay sex in Pompeii. I hate to break this to you, but there was. There's a lot of gay sex in every Roman city. But before I started reading this, I wondered, why would you do this? And I thought, well, thanks to Pompeii and Herculaneum, we know a lot about the time period. We know a lot of little details. You could actually fill in a lot of quotidian details to make this come alive. But alive is not one of the things that. The main problem that I have with it's harmless. The main problem that I have with this book is that it's entirely animated by identity politics, and that bothers me. That really bothers me. It's lazy. It's admonishing. It's at heart, ironically enough, quite bigoted. But identity politics is not when you have a gay character or two gay characters. It's when gay is all there is to them. And this also applies to people. If you are gay, okay, great. I don't really care. I mainly care about what you like to read, and whether or not you read any book reviews, and maybe what you think of current events or whatnot. I'm mainly interested in whether or not you want to come over here for wine and calzones. I'll listen, sure, but that's only one small part of who you are. If it's everything about who you are, if it's literally everything about who you are, well, that's identity politics, and that's, among other things, very boring. No matter what the identity is, among other things, all the other things that it is, it's very boring. And ultimately, I mean, it takes barely any time at all for this book to give the strong impression that its two main characters are only about their Johnsons and not anything else. They're Johnsons and fighting the societal oppression they know they'll encounter. I maybe I could reread this someday. I don't know. Maybe I just went at it in a bad mood. It is harmless. I don't mean to hold it up as something evil. It's harmless. But a part of me thinks that a book called Pompeii, City of Gay Sex had a lot more potential than this book gave it. I'll just leave it at that. I did a reread. I reread Philip Ziegler's book, The Black Death. Ziegler has written a lot of stuff. He's written a lot of things that I really like. This is my favorite one-volume history of the Black Death. I read it in this little Pelican mass market paperback, and believe it or not, that's not the first time that I read that Pelican mass market paperback, and it won't be the last time. I wasn't being extra careful with it, but it's easily going to take a couple more reads. And this is a layered enough book so that you will reread it. This is everything about the Black Death. The social movements, the personal stuff, all the records, the physiological stuff. It's all just really, really good. It's horrifying, but it's really, really good. And the irony here of the little Pelican mass market from probably 90 years ago, holding up so well, is that I read this for the first time in a trade paperback, a purple trade paperback with the Grim Reaper on the cover. It blew apart like straw. And the next time I bought a copy of that same trade paperback, it blew apart like straw, whereas this thing was just made better. So I enjoyed it. There've been 4 or 5 major mainstream soup to nuts histories of the Black Death since this came out. One just a few years ago that was 10 times the size. None of them outdo it, really, for me. Maybe in terms also of just writing ability. Then we have a work of history. Another work of history. This is far more contemporary. This is new. I read this, and I really liked it. There were parts of it that I disagreed with, parts of it where I think the sources are just being read wrong. But there was a lot of it that made me think. I'll probably go back to this book. The book is by Shane Bobricki, and it's called The Crowd in the Early Middle Ages. And I was worried. I know I say this all the time. Well, I mentioned it. Uh, I don't like identity politics. I don't like it at all. I have mentioned many times on this channel that its ascendancy can only be broken apart by something much worse than what it itself is. Uh, but that doesn't mean that I side with it just because its replacement, the only thing that can replace it in the movie industry and academia in the hiring industry is worse than it. That doesn't mean that I like it. I actually managed to hate both. So when I saw this book and saw a rainbow backing the word crowd, I feared the worst. Believe it or not, a little thing like that. When all it really, all it could be doing is just drawing attention to the cover. That's all. But this is a study of what crowds were, what made a crowd as opposed to a gathering, what they did, how they were viewed by those in power, and how they were viewed by all the different layers of power. So, did the local sheriff view a crowd different from the local lord or the monarch? I really like this. It's really intelligently done, very, very multi-layered. I'm hoping that was the choice for the color on the cover. I need to go back to it. I don't know that I will this year, but I need to go back to it. It was a serious work of history. Then this next one, I must have read this at some point or other in the past. I must have. But this felt like a first-time read. None of it seemed familiar to me. Haven't yet gone back into my records to see whether or not I've ever read this, but I read The Glass Key by Dashiell Hammett and loved it. I thought it was so much more controlled. Actually, the word that kept coming to mind as I was reading it was humble, which is not a word that I or anyone else, living or dead, has ever associated with Dashiell Hammett. And it's certainly not a word that I associate with anything else that I've ever read by him. And I don't mean that this is a humble book in terms of the narrative voice. The narrative voice still thinks he's God on a pancake. Humble in the sense of towards the reader. I need to do more than just quip. This has to be more than just style. I need to give you a novel. And I know it's heresy, but I don't think Dashiell Hammett often thinks that way in his books. Certainly, I don't get the impression from the books themselves that he thinks that way. But this was battened down. It was battened down. It was foursquare. It was wonderful. I loved it. In a way that I don't remember. I think I would have remembered if I'd read this and loved it years ago in the same way. Because it doesn't... I shouldn't say it doesn't read like Dashiell Hammett, because it does. But it doesn't feel as contemptuous of the reader as Dashiell Hammett usually does, in my opinion. This isn't contemptuous of the reader at all. It's contemptuous of pretty much everybody else, but not the reader. And that makes it stand out to me from the Dashiell Hammett, the usual stuff, and makes me wonder if maybe I never read this. I don't know. But I really, really enjoyed it. I have a Dashiell Hammett, one of those Avenel omnibus editions that has, I think, 5 novels in it. I don't remember if this is one of them, but this made me want to go back and read more Dashiell Hammett, read another Dashiell Hammett, one that I know that I've read before, and see if maybe I was just going at some of those others with a chip on my shoulder. I really can't stand it when an author, any author, opens his book with a question to me. He doesn't ask it directly. It's not part of his epigraph. It's not asked by any of his characters. But he is nevertheless asking a question directly of me. He's saying, are you man enough to read my book? I hate that. When an author asks that question, and there are plenty of contemporary authors who do, I instinctively get my hackles up. Because A, I shouldn't need to be, and B, what are you going to give me if I am? What are you going to give me? I might not be making sense in any of this Friday reads, but when an author asks that question, are you man enough to read my book? my instinctive reaction has always been, are you going to give me a $10 bill if I've done better in single combat in bars than you have in your life? You're asking, are you man enough to read my book? And your formulation of that unspoken question means that the highest I can go is man enough. What if I'm more than that? What if I should be asking you, are you man enough to write a book for me? Are you going to pay me something for the insult? Not to mention the fact that you are, when you silently ask that question, eliminating half your readership. The part that aren't men at all. It's just, obviously, as you can tell, this author has mostly annoyed me. And this book didn't at all. So a definite reading success. Then we have, we can finish up here. Again, this Friday Reads has gone long. We can finish up with another book, another reread. Hey, baby. How you doing? You want to get down? Oh, no, there's a pillow on your bed. Do you want to get down from there? What are you going to do? Huh? There's a pillow over there. Should I get that out of your way? There you go. It's a little bit more active day today than yesterday. It was pouring rain yesterday out of a dark sky. At 11 in the morning, you would not have known that the sun was in the sky. So we didn't do much. But anyway, the last book that I want to show you is a reread. I've read this a couple of times. I enjoy it more every time I reread it. Even though you wouldn't think I would. This is by John Guy, and it is his book, Tudor England. A big one-volume history of Tudor England from the Battle of Bosworth to the death of Queen Elizabeth. So it's not long. I think it's probably 500 pages long, something like that. And you would think, I don't know what you would think. I don't know who you are. But I would think that after a certain point, books like this would have no appeal for me. A big one-volume history of Tudor England, whether it's this or the England of the Tudors, or there's a big one-volume history of Tudor England about every 2 years in the mainstream market. This thing is 60 years old. And I would think that these things would have very limited or no appeal for me because they literally aren't going to cover anything I don't already know in depth. And I don't know. I've had bookish friends say, "Well, you're not going to learn anything from a book like that, so how could you possibly like it? Why would you read it?" And here I think about the art of the one-volume overview, which is a thing on its own. It's a tricky thing to do, not because of readers out there who already know everything in detail, but for readers who don't. What kind of a job are you going to do knowing that both groups of those readers are going to be reading you? I think there's an art form involved, whether it's a one-volume history of Rome or one-volume history of Tudor England or one-volume history of World War II. I think there's an art form involved. At least I've come to perceive it that way and to read them for that. So I'm not reading a one-volume history of the Angevin Empire to learn anything about. I'm reading these things to see what kind of a job the author will do pivoting between those two worlds. And Guy does a great job. Just great. He's witty. He's extremely judicial. He isn't just relating what's going on here. He's also, along the way, relating the various theories about how to interpret what he's talking about. Historians have come up with various theories. Was all of Tudor England entirely driven by the mania of individual Tudor monarchs? Is there any truth to the revolution of Henrician England, that the institutional state was born here and given power on its own, separate from the king? And how important were all those wives, or what inroads did religion play? Various schools of historians over the last 2 centuries have had whole bunches of theories about a whole bunch of those things. And Guy nods at all of them. He doesn't just skate right over them. And he doesn't pretend that one catechism is just de facto the right one. Instead, he picks up a lot of those theories for a lot of different subjects and just plays around with them a little, talks about them a little, in a very accessible way. It's a little bit creaky, it's a little bit Dawnish, but still really, really good. I don't know. I think I probably read this book 3 times, and this week was the fourth time, and I love it every time. Every time I find something new in it, not anything of a factual revelation, but rather it's not so much are you going to teach me about Wyatt's rebellion. It's are you going to draw threads between things that I didn't see? And that is wonderful. I'm probably not doing a good job explaining it, but I guess this reconfirms in my mind that I'm a big fan of one volume treatments of things, no matter what it is. I'm a big fan of them if they're done well. And it seems to me that a lot of times they are done well. I should write something about it. I should examine a whole bunch of them and write something about that. See if I can come up with a unified field theory of one volume histories of things. But anyway, that wraps it up. Tudor England. I have been very much feeling a draw to the Tudor period, fiction and nonfiction, just very much digging into that. So I'll probably yield to that as we move into December. Because of the bailiwick that I mentioned, I read new releases in the American book market, and I try not to read ahead. I try not to read 2025 releases in 2024, which means usually that sometime in December, around the time when I stop making videos, I also run out of new releases to read, and I drift in that direction in the course of the first 2 weeks of December. So I will probably in the next couple of weeks be doing a lot more rereading, a lot more older stuff reading, rather than new releases. You never know; it depends on what I get in the mail. But anyway, I'll wrap this up for now. As usual with Friday reads, or weekend reads, or whatever. If you don't make a BookTube video on the subject, and I think you should, but if you don't have a BookTube channel, then feel free to tell me what you're working on. I get responses like that every week. People either leave them in the comments or send me an email, and I love them. Absolutely love them. I don't know that I respond to all of them, but I love hearing about it. Love hearing about what you're reading, why you picked that book. It's so interesting to me because most of you have so much less reading time than I do. Therefore, is so much more concentrated and so much more valuable that it's intensely interesting for me to know what you choose to fill that time. I mean, for most of you, it can't be more than 2 hours a day. What do you choose to fill that time? Especially since 2 hours a day for most of you is what? 100 pages read? Something like that? So it makes it all the more unbelievably vital, the choices that you make. Always, that's what, considering that fact, I'm always surprised at how many of you say you're mood readers. That feel free to tell me what you're reading this week, what you plan on reading this week, and I'd love to hear about it. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. This video is quite long enough, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.